Welcome to the Amplifiers. The Amplifiers is a series that we're going to have with individuals that are disruptors, that are risk takers, that are innovators, that are helping use technologies like AI, the cloud, and many others to radically disrupt different industries like healthcare, financial services, consumer goods, and retail. On today's show, we have Sumit Nagpal. Sumit is CEO of Cherish Health. He's our first amplifier on our series, and I'm excited to have him here today with us. Welcome, Sumit.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Well, what I wanted to do is to talk a little bit about you, introduce you, and maybe we go through a bit of a conversation about healthcare and the disruption and what you guys are doing. So Sumit and I know each other now for, I think, close to a decade, somewhere in that neighborhood. We worked together and in the digital group at Accenture. Sumit was the global lead for healthcare innovation, serving payers, providers, pharmacies. And what he did was he was really good at advising CEOs on how they can be competitive in their business and become more efficient, grow more effectively, serve patients, and get to healthier outcomes. He's got an amazing background in history. He's a serial entrepreneur and risk taker. He started a number of different, very innovative organizations, startups in the healthcare space. And he's known as a luminary in healthcare and a member of the HIMSS board. What I wanted to do was start off by sharing a little bit about the company Sumit started a couple of years ago called Cherish Healthcare. What's interesting about Cherish Healthcare is that Cherish is really disrupting the elderly care market. And what they're doing is bringing artificial intelligence radar into the home with these non-invasive devices. So they don't have to be on your hand. They're not a camera on the wall, but the devices sit in a room. And what the AI is able to do is know when someone's laying down or when someone's fallen, and read all of the metrics of that individual and alert a centralized service if they've fallen or if there's been some injury. And what that does is it keeps people out of elderly care, out of nursing homes, and saves a lot of money in the healthcare system. And what's amazing about what Sumit has done is that he has done that on his own. It's been his own investment, his own time, his own passion putting that business together. And that's been the advantage. And that's what I want to talk about today, about him, how he's really personifying an amplifier.
Certainly. Thank you. And, I'll start off by saying, Bob, it's been just awesome getting to know you and become deep friends over the years. Bob taught me some really important lessons. One of the biggest lessons, and I'm going to embarrass you a little, but one of the biggest lessons he taught me was all about abundance, and how in organizations, when you take on an abundant mindset, everyone's boat rises. I've lived that ever since, and I can't thank you enough for teaching me those lessons. Cherish has benefited from that. Also, another point I'll make before we dive in is, this is not just my journey. This is many, many people, a team of 7 of us who've done 3 companies together, incredible investors, individuals who have essentially bet on me, give me a chance to go do what we're doing here, and advised me every step of the way with some of the most incredible insights. We've become this great listening organization, learning organization. We've innovated in ways, we've taken risks that we couldn't have taken had we structured ourselves differently. And so there's tremendous gratitude in this organization. We're here because of the efforts and the belief and the help of a lot of people. So I just you might be featuring an amplifier, but this amplifier is amplified by a lot of people.
Sumit, you have a very interesting background in history. Why don't you spend a little bit of time telling us about where you grew up, how you were raised, the DNA and all the things that enabled you to become a serial entrepreneur?
Fun story. So I actually grew up in India. Um, my childhood was up in the mountains in Kashmir. I'm one of those folks from India who learned how to ski in a small, um, very very rare breed. Learned how to ski when I was probably 6, and grew up in a part of the country that is, one of the most beautiful places on the planet. Had this awesome childhood in the wilderness, going off and doing things. Um, Developed a love for nature. Wound up moving to the U.S. when my parents came here for their sabbatical, and I wound up falling in love with the diversity and all the stuff that I learned when I got here. Wound up staying for college. Wound up being walking into computer science one day with every single computer in the lab replaced with a next machine. It was love at first sight. I had to work for the man. And, a couple of years later, I was a lowly sales engineer setting up demos for Steve Jobs. That's how I got started. Now, what happened while I was doing work with Next and being on the road and helping sell deals ranging from, a very significant audio company in the Boston area to Bell Labs in their neck of the woods in New Jersey. What I was also absorbing from Steve was two things that have stuck with me ever since. They've colored everything I've done. Number one, he gave me the bug to be an entrepreneur. I just absolutely developed a fascination for creating things, inventing things, and building businesses. And the second thing that I got to learn from the master was how to take very, very complex ideas and boil them down to their essence. Those two qualities have then been reflected in every single company I've done, which has now been 5. Cherish is company 5 over the past 30 years. So I guess you could call me a serial entrepreneur. I learned so much and I expanded my mind so much, and we got to do new things in new ways that the builder came out in me again, and I wanted to go build something again. So wound up creating company 5, and Cherish, of course, is one of those companies that benefited from all of this experience.
Sumit, why don't you give us a little perspective on broader healthcare? Healthcare now represents somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% of US GDP. That's closing in on $6 trillion. How do we make it better? How do we improve the outcomes? How do we reduce costs to match other OECD countries? Tell us what you think.
Yeah. Bob, you've gotten, as you always do, right to the heart of the topic with healthcare. We're spending too much. We're spending more and more of too much. We can't keep printing that money, and that applies to virtually every economy in the world, not just the U.S. We're just in some ways the poster child for how far out this can go, and we're continuing to live with the kind of service quality that so many other industries have been forced to, kicking and screaming sometimes, evolve beyond into a whole different customer focus. The notion of a waiting room where you go to wait to get service feels like old school bureaucracy rather than a modern business. That's just a symptom of what's underneath all of this stuff. And what I see happening in healthcare is, on the one hand, tremendous, incredible work by clinicians every single day to save people's lives. Tremendous innovation with procedures and devices and algorithms and inventions that drugs that fundamentally change how we view ourselves, even as a species, right? We think of living longer. We think of living longer with fewer conditions and fewer problems. We think of our health span rather than our lifespan. We're talking about longevity. There's all this great stuff. And yet the cost curve on healthcare continues to shift up, and quality of the experience, perhaps even the hardship, continues to not really move in a positive direction. So what's underneath all of that, and how is that going to change? One of the anecdotes I can give is, a year ago, I was on a panel where we were talking about how we might move to a model of health assurance where we're focused more on the prevention of illness rather than on the delivery of sick care. And somebody on the panel said, look, what if I told you that by spending 2% more of GDP, we could cure a certain type of cancer? Wouldn't you all agree that that's a good thing? Later that day, I realized that that was a sort of a false argument. You can, in fact, do both. You can, in fact, take out costs because there is so much waste in healthcare, and at the same time have that innovation and have that improvement in curing disease. They're not mutually exclusive. We don't have to get from 18, 20% of GDP to 26% of GDP. That's not inevitable. 2011, and then more recently, McKinsey study that said that we might as well burn every 42 cents we spend on the dollar in healthcare because it's all wasted. There's lots and lots of room for improvement. And the question really has been, is there a will to do that? And the question really has been, what's the appetite? And until there have been some external pressures that have sort of focused that question, we've seen very, very slow progress. The external factors, three of them that I'll highlight that have focused our mind on actually dealing with cost, not because we're dealing with cost, but we're looking to solve these issues. Number one in that list of essentially existential challenges is the workforce shortage. We don't have enough nurses. We can't make enough doctors. People are leaving the profession because of burnout. COVID changed everything in so many ways. And that was one of the big things that happened, that a lot of folks basically said, enough. I don't want to work this way. I don't want to work this hard and not be, for this level of appreciation. So the workforce shortage is really focusing this industry to say, well, we don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough doctors. Maybe we need to change the equation on utilization. Maybe we need to actually start using people in patients' extended families, their caregivers, as a part of the health delivery equation. Maybe we need to actually reduce the utilization of services where those services have become too expensive to deliver, or we don't have enough staff, by moving some of that into community settings. So I think these external pressures, workforce being number one, number two being the fact that our populations are aging, and that's just something we're not going to reverse. We're getting older as a population, and we're living longer, and we're going to live longer with more chronic conditions and more illness. You take that tsunami and you take workforce shortage, and now you've got a collision of opposing forces where you actually just have to deal with it. And then, of course, there are changing consumer expectations about just the kind of service quality, the kind of engagement, the kind of interaction they want to have with a service provider. Doctors have always been revered. They do this incredible work. They save people's lives, but there's also a service component to it all. And those expectations are changing. And people are actually starting to buy stuff that they wouldn't think of paying for before because it's more convenient or it's easier, or it's more expedient. Well, all of that is causing a shift as well. So I think we're at the beginning of a major shift in healthcare, where that shift in where healthcare is delivered, how much it costs, and who delivers it, all those three things will shift over time, because the pressure to cause those shifts to happen is now existential.
It's interesting, Sumit, because you and I were on the front lines of what we thought was the mass democratization of healthcare. It started with CVS, Minute Clinics. Then you saw the pivot occurring at some of the other pharmacies like Walgreens. Then you were excited about Walmart Health, and the thinking and theory behind it was Walmart's going to democratize healthcare the way they have with grocery and some other segments of retail. And then finally, Amazon and Amazon Health and the movement there. And I remember you talking to the folks at Amazon about healthcare and how excited you were. And the thinking behind it was, this is 2/3 of the personal bankruptcies in the US. A lot of people aren't getting their care and going bankrupt. And you and I were talking about this and saying, hey, this is a transformational moment in healthcare. And now here we are today, a bunch of announcements around healthcare, Walmart Health being shut down, Amazon is struggling with it. Is there a pivot? Is there a big transformational moment in healthcare where it becomes affordable for folks and widespread, and we get better aligned when it comes to that gap where we're overspending as a percentage of GDP? What do you think, Sumit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I think, the lessons learned through these experiments, this has been my thesis, that when big tech, when big retail tries to shift away from their core business and enter healthcare and try to become a provider, the challenge that they face is learning the rules of being a provider that organizations that have been in that industry have learned to play by and live by over decades and decades and decades. And those rules are very hard to learn for a commercial entity. And number two, those rules are completely out of sync with your quarterly earnings call, where you have to talk about growth and where you have to talk about margin, and where none of those rules actually seem to make sense. And so the pattern that you see over and over again is 18% of GDP, a big tech, big retail, big telco rushes in. We've got to claim some piece of that pie. They're coming in to make margin off the pie in this massive part of the economy that they haven't managed to touch yet. 2 years in, the experiment is starting to show signs of taking the company down, because it's this big expense that has a very long tail on return, and it's getting really hard to explain it on the earnings call. And very soon thereafter, they're out of the business because, hey, no one wants to deal with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a great paper that John Glasser published about whether big tech or big retail can actually disrupt healthcare. And the conclusion there was, well, only by playing these roles side by side with existing healthcare organizations. And I think that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that they can, in fact, bring their scale, their capital, their agility, their ingenuity. They can actually do that and have an impact on healthcare if they focus on two things: cost takeout or reducing hardship. And by doing not healthcare delivery, but by picking an adjacency, doing something
Mm-hmm.
that they do already really well, pivoting 2 or 3 degrees off from that, where they can actually massively take out cost, or where they can actually massively reduce hardship, or both. That's where the magic lies. Not become healthcare providers themselves. Otherwise, they can enable healthcare providers to deliver better, but that's ultimately commoditized, right? You
Mm-hmm.
ultimately are simply supplying tech into an existing system where competitors will drive costs down, or healthcare itself will say, well, we can't afford that. This is what we can afford. Well, the alternative to that, which is what we're going to see, is pivoting to that adjacency. That's one model. The second model is what we've seen with Amazon, where they finally figured out, wait a minute, we don't have to grow this. We can buy it. And when they went and bought One Medical, there was pain on the One Medical side. Amazon went ahead and applied some of its rules to how One Medical worked, but they bought an already existing, fully functioning, at scale business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then they applied big tech rules to it. And they're going to keep doing that. So those are the two models: adjacency or acquisition, build versus buy. And an adjacency is really about doing more of what you do to take out cost using tech mostly. Or an adjacency as well, or to get into healthcare is a buy decision where you're buying something at massive scale. You're seeing the experiment with General Catalyst, with Summit Health. That's a provider organization that they're getting into, where they hope to demonstrate health assurance at scale
Mm-hmm.
by working with an existing health network and an integrated health delivery network, and applying the rules of innovation to that. The jury's still out, but these are the two paths for these experiments that I see more and more arising. And bottom line on Walmart, we saw the writing on the wall when it became really obvious that what they were selling in retail health was not particularly differentiated. It was just more convenient, but not differentiated. And B, it was not a SKU on a shelf.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those two things ultimately created the challenges, the headwinds that they ran into, and ultimately it's the demise of the program. Not particularly differentiated and not their core business.
Exactly. And you could apply that to chain drug retailers as well. Look at CVS, for example. They have investments like Minute Clinic, even the PBM, Pharmacy Benefits Management service. They're now a healthcare provider and payer. It's not a SKU on the shelf. It's not a script. It's not front of store. Chain drugs have tried to pivot to become a healthcare company, but the jury's out on whether that's the right approach. We've seen a lot of disruption in that space. I'm interested in what you think. We're talking about AI here, and there's a lot of noise in the space, Sumit. Everybody and their brother is now an expert. In your opinion, are there places where AI or other very disruptive technologies and innovation have the opportunity to dramatically reduce costs and improve care and outcomes? What do you think, Sumit?
So, we could be encyclopedic and list all the things that are now examples of AI being applied in healthcare, ranging from drug discovery to identifying depression, just by 30 seconds of someone's voice, or reading pathology slides better than human beings, and reading MRIs and CT scans better than human beings at scale, at volume. All this stuff is now here in real. Having said that, I'll use Cherish, my company, as poster child for something that couldn't exist without AI. This company and what we've done here if we had tried to do this 5 years ago, it would have been, it would have proven what somebody told me right at the time when I started this company, which was, people have been trying to do this with radar for 40 years. What makes you think you can pull this off? Right? That was 4 years ago in January of 2020. Somebody from the industry, very prominent personality who knows what radar is and what it does and what it doesn't. And 4 years later, we've shipped the product and we're doing things that, I ran a demonstration just before this conversation in this apartment we have in our office. And we've got a device sitting in a room and it's seeing through a wall, and there are people in another room and it's tracking everything that's happening in that other room. And it's got all of that working despite the fact that radar is this messy, noisy stuff. And the traditional ways of dealing with this messy, noisy signal has been signal processing painstakingly, using math and a big brain and figuring out, finding needles in haystacks to say, oh, that must be the heart rate, or oh, that must be the respiration, or oh, that must be a person standing, or oh, that must be a person who's fallen down. And those things have never scaled. They've never gotten to, a 2-room setting, for example. They've scaled perhaps to a single person a few feet away, but they've never gotten to a device that can track a family across a household just by sitting in a corner and seeing through walls. That's crazy stuff, right? It's kind of magic. And yet that's what we've done at scale, take it from one house to another, to another, to another, and it just works. Why is that? Because of AI and what AI has enabled us to do. Without machine learning, without at scale training with ground truth, where machine learning models then learn how to recognize the patterns you're looking for and become better and better over time. The same stuff that, autopilot does for a Tesla over time. First Tesla I got was, barely kept its lanes, and now it stops at traffic lights and dings when the light turns green. Well, what's that about, right? That kind of innovation, that kind of pace of innovation is now available to healthcare because of AI. And so we're able to pick up your body position for multiple people in a home. We know when mom's sitting, standing, walking, or lying down, when she's sleeping, when she's eating, when she's toileting. We know when she's fallen. We know how that fall was. I don't know, that fall, and that it wasn't a deliberate action to sit on the ground. We know if someone trips and falls, hits their head on the way down, where an accelerometer would not pick that up. And a slow fall we can catch where someone perhaps pulls a bookshelf down on themselves. Again, wearables with accelerometers would not pick that up, and yet we pick that up consistently over and over again. What's that about? It's all made possible because we've got this signal that is high resolution, but that signal is so hard to understand, except machine learning exists now. These are the kinds of innovations that are now possible. Once you put this in someone's home, you're able to understand changes in their patterns of living. You're able to actually move care into a model where it's not creepy. There's no camera. There's nothing to wear. There's nothing to remember to wear. As our populations age, there's nothing to imagine a person who's got early stage dementia moving into Alzheimer's, remembering to charge a watch, remembering to wear a ring every time they take it off to charge it. That's the stuff that doesn't scale. And so being able to leave a device in a corner of a home and forget about it and have it just do its thing and raise an alarm if someone needs help, or let someone know if patterns of living are changing. Mom's not been to the kitchen in 2 days. She's not eating. Grandpa's lying longer in bed. He's getting depressed. Those kinds of things, fusing that with audio and figuring out, wow, grandma's anxiety level has gone up. Those kinds of things are what are now possible with AI that simply weren't possible before. That is really going to be the catalyst to get back to our earlier point. How are we going to actually bend the cost curve? How we're actually going to reduce hardship? This is the kind of technology that will do both.
Well, that's amazing, Sumit. And Sumit, let me ask you a personal question, kind of pivoting a little bit here. What I found with CEOs of startup businesses is, contrary to popular belief, they're very disciplined. They have a long-term outlook and stick with things and are persistent. For years, they'll continue, and they have the championship mindset. What drives you? What are the things that you think about as a leader? How do you keep going in an environment where every one day can be up, another day can be down? How do you motivate everyone around you?
Well, one way I can answer the question is, it might sound glib, but all my friends are my investors, and if this fails, I lose all my friends. That's that. So you could call it fear, but really, the reality is, I am determined to solve this problem. I live and breathe this every moment, and I'm determined to solve this problem in timelines that I have learned from other incredible leaders are possible. Right? We have innovated not just in the technology that we built here. We've invented new ways of doing things with the technology, of course. But we've also, along the way, invented new ways of building hardware. We now think of hardware as something that we can iterate just the way you iterate software. 12 days after we have a hardware design done, we have hardware in our hands that we can test. We're doing a rapid prototyping. We're doing iterations on ideas that used to be 1 year long sales cycles. They call them spins. We've got innovation happening in how we hire, the kinds of folks we hire. We've got innovation happening in how we work here. Every layer of this puzzle, we've invented something new. What keeps me going is just the problem solving, the invention, the sheer creativity of it all. And then watching all these folks, because this team is awesome, watching all these folks actually show up every day and do it with me, and go do something that's never been done before and make it work. That's what keeps me going. For the first few years, we went through prototype after prototype after prototype where we kept hitting walls. We tried to do things the traditional way with signal processing, and I'll give you an example. We used to have stuff work when we left home, the office in the evening, and the next morning we come back and the stuff that was working the day before, picking up a heart rate, picking up respiration, wasn't working anymore. We realized that because of the noise of and the messiness of the radar signals at night, even the fact that a trash can got moved by a janitor who cleaned the office became an issue. That's when we said, well, this is never going to scale. How do we solve this? And the inventiveness of this team, ultimately, that's where AI and machine learning came in, and that's how we solved that. Well, the sheer invention of this by itself is super exciting. And then you take all of that, and then you hear people when you describe what we built. And they, within a minute or two of you starting to explain it, start a sentence that begins with, well, my mom or my dad. That's where it becomes super personal.
Yeah.
The why of this company is all about that. And that's what ultimately drives me to make this work and drives this team to make this work.
Sumit, that's really great. I've done software development, product development, and what's amazing about what you've done is you have the device itself and there's complexity. You probably have a couple of manufacturers in the world like Foxconn that can develop the precision you have in your device. You have your software and the AI algorithms you need to fine tune to identify different activities and events, like someone falling versus someone sitting or someone actually laying down. There's a distribution channel and there's big partners. How do you get this out of market? Who are you partnering with to really commercialize this and get escape velocity on in the investment thesis and get to another level?
Yeah, we've innovated even there. We've said, look, we're not going to bring this to market ourselves, at least not yet. We're going to partner with some of the world's largest companies, not because they're going to give us a hunting license into their customer base, but because they've actually bought into the product and the service and the business model that it enables. They're going to bring it to market. And so, one of the most incredible partnerships that I've ever had the pleasure of building is the one with Alarm.com, one of the largest home security companies in the world, actually in your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Where they've not just invested in us, but they've chosen to bring us to market into their dealer channel. We announced the product with them at CES this year, and the response from their dealer network, the response from the customer base has been awesome. We're bringing this to market with them. They're helping us figure out product market fit better than we would ever have figured that out. They've got 9 million plus homes as their customers. We're learning from them what makes this work. We're doing the same with AT&T. We're doing the same with a major payer. We're doing the same with 2 telcos in other countries. And this is really all about learning from folks who are already very, very close to the customers whose homes we're winding up in and whom we serve, learning from them what they already know rather than reinventing the wheel. And so I think even in that sense, we've innovated in our go-to-market approach.
Look, you're definitely innovative. You look ahead, there are headwinds in the economy, cost of capital is higher, and that's been, it's been in a long time. We potentially have a change of administration here in the US. Then there's probably more geopolitical issues right now that I've probably ever experienced. But as you look forward, what do you see as the biggest challenge or risk as it relates to what you're trying to create in terms of the quality of life and care for folks? What's that big risk that you stay up at night worrying about?
Yeah. So the risks are, at every level that you've just described. And if we just step back and just even remember, we started Cherish 4 months before the world shut down. We were dependent on global supply chains. We were dependent on PCB manufacturing in China, which had suddenly gone out of style. We were dependent on chips and parts from Taiwan and Korea, where we couldn't even reach the folks. We started this company when that all happened. And so from day one, we had to figure out how to work with every one of those challenges. We were being told, certain types of chips were going out of fashion and we better buy up an entire inventory of them years before we needed them. We were being told that there would be 52-week delivery timelines on components. We started this company when that was happening. And we had to learn, and we had to bring in talent that knew what that meant to then figure out how to deal with it. And that's what we did, right? So I think one of the greatest challenges as a business I can imagine is starting a business that is so dependent on so many things when the world has shut down. If we survive that, we can survive a lot of things. That's one. Two, we're always constantly thinking about the future and saying, well, what is it that we really need to be doing right now that matters, and ignore everything else? That's been a huge lesson as well. I talk about this relative to capital. One of the biggest mistakes that companies make is they raise too much capital too early. Then they have this problem of too many things to do and the money gets burned. We've seen that happen over and over again. And so we raise just enough capital to get through whatever iteration cycle we needed to get through until we figured out, well, what is it that we really needed to do? And then we raised the next round of capital. So even our capital strategy has been fundamentally different. We've raised capital not from traditional VC. We raised capital from folks, individuals, family offices, strategics, because this is a hardware business with invention as a core invention, as a part of bringing anything to market. And that is, if that doesn't spell risk, nothing does. So we really had two options: raise capital with very low valuation because the risk is very high, or raise capital in ways where people got super aligned around actually creating value. So we innovated even in how we raise capital. All of that has been just instrumental, fundamental in why we are where we are.
That's really insightful, Sumit. Before we close out your interview, I want to make a big pivot and ask you a fun question. So Sam Altman likes poker, Bill Gates likes bridge. Who knows what Larry Ellison likes to do? Maybe meditate, or fighter jets. Bezos launches rockets for fun. So what do you do for fun? What does a day outside of Cherish look like for Sumit Nagpal?
I have a few things that I've become very fond of. One, I just love to cook, and I just cooked for 50 people for the first party we threw at the office. That was this week, and it was absolute fun. So I do that. It calms me down. It helps me focus. It helps me think. It's almost trance-like. It's great. And I've gotten to become a pretty decent cook. I love to work on cars. My son and I are restoring a 1975 Spitfire, and I think this weekend we're going to change its hydraulics and bushings. So we like cars, and we spend time playing with toys. No fighter jets, no racing yachts. I remember years ago I signed a contract in Hawaii, and the CEO of the company told me, well, you're not allowed to go swimming anymore. I'm like, why? Because there are sharks. You can go swimming after this is delivered. Like, well, I sort of owe that to my investors.
Well, Sumit, this has been an amazing hour. I really appreciate your time. I'm proud of everything you've accomplished, impressed with all the things that you've achieved, and I really appreciate you being my first guest on the Amplifiers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. And thank you for being an awesome mentor and a friend.